hush settled over the dingy, time-worn courtroom in the center of an old coastal city. The smell of salt water drifted in through the open windows, mingling with the stale scent of dust and age. Reporters whispered in anxious tones, their notepads and microphones at the ready. There at the witness stand stood 12-year-old Kenji Okada, small for his age, but with a steady determination in his dark eyes. He clutched a worn, stuffed dog with sagging ears, its fur matted and faded from years of being held tight. All eyes fixed on him, awaiting the words that could reshape everything. Kenji, the defense attorney, a middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair, asked, her voice thick with tension, "Could you please repeat what you just said?" It was no simple question. It was a challenge, a desperate appeal for clarity. Kenji took in a breath so deep his shoulders trembled. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, yet unwavering, he spoke. "I said, my mother didn't do it. But I know who did." Around him, a ripple of astonishment spread through the crowd. It was like a single stone dropped into a still pond. Shockwaves, gasps, frantic shuffling of papers. The presiding judge, a tired man with a permanent furrow in his brow, leaned forward. His gavel hovered menacingly, prepared to restore order at any second. Even the prosecutor, rumored to be as relentless as the crashing ocean waves outside, shifted uneasily in his seat. Kenji's mother, Mariko Okada, sat at the defense table with shackles around her wrists, her complexion pale as chalk. She stared at her son with an odd mixture of hope and dread etched across her features. The defense attorney, Miss Abrams, cleared her throat. "Kenji," she asked gently, "can you tell us who did?" He opened his mouth, lips forming a name, but before he could say it, the prosecutor leapt to his feet, voice booming through the courtroom. "Objection, Your Honor!" The word echoed off the peeling walls and faintly flickering overhead lights. The judge slammed his gavel. "Order in the court." Although his voice was stern, tension vibrated in the air like a taut violin string about to snap. Mariko's eyes glistened with tears, and Kenji wondered if his mother was relieved or petrified by what he had just declared. He squeezed his stuffed dog, shoulders tight, silently praying he could be strong enough for both of them. It had not always been this way. Barely 3 months earlier, the Okada family had been an ordinary trio living in a modest apartment overlooking the harbor. Kenji's father, Seiji, was a fisherman who left before dawn to set his nets. Mariko ran a small street food stall each evening, famous for her savory fish cakes that regular customers claimed were better than gold. Kenji's days had been filled with typical concerns: school, chores, and a growing fascination with spy novels. An interest that would soon intertwine dangerously with real life. He had once believed their lives were predictable, if modest. Yet all it took was one horrifying event to crumble that illusion. It happened on a stormy night when thunder rattled the windows and lightning traced sharp lines across the inky sky. Kenji had been reading in bed, lulled by the smell of fish stew simmering in the small kitchen. Then came the urgent pounding at the door. Police lights bathed the dingy corridor in a harsh red and blue glare, as officers arrested Mariko on suspicion of assault and robbery. Supposedly she had attacked a local merchant, Mr. Takahashi, during a break-in, leaving him in critical condition. Witnesses claimed to see a woman with Mariko's build, sprinting away from the scene, and bizarrely, Mariko's old ID card was discovered near the victim's back door. From that moment on, Kenji's reality resembled a nightmare. "Mom!" Kenji had shouted, racing after the officers, leading her out in handcuffs. "Mom, what's happening? You didn't do anything, right?" Mariko, drenched from the downpour, looked at him with stricken eyes. Her hair clung to her cheeks. "Kenji, it's going to be all right," she'd whispered, but he had heard the tremor in her voice. Even his father, who rushed in from the storm, stared in shell-shocked disbelief as they put Mariko into the back of a patrol car. "She's innocent," Seiji had roared, fists clenched, but his words vanished into the roar of sirens. The next day, gossip spread like wildfire. People whispered about the strange woman who had battered Mr. Takahashi, rummaging through his possessions, leaving him unconscious in a pool of blood. They claimed Mariko had a motive. Some said she owed him money. Others insisted she was desperate because fish sales had been plummeting. "She's just a small-time street vendor," they said in hushed tones, but maybe she was in some trouble. Kenji quickly realized that once neighbors made up their minds, it was nearly impossible to change them. At school, classmates who used to play with him now averted their eyes. Some parents forbade their children from talking to Kenji. "He's the son of that criminal," one mother sneered. The weight of suspicion was suffocating, pressing in on him from all sides. Only two people seemed steadfastly loyal: Kenji's father, Seiji, and an elderly fisherman named Tanaka, who had known Mariko since she was a girl. Tanaka visited Kenji one afternoon, a sorrowful glint in his wise old eyes. "There's more to this than meets the eye, boy," he said, patting the child's shoulder. "Believe me, the truth can be hidden like pearls in deep waters. You've got to dive if you want to find it." Kenji, though terrified, clung to that advice. There was no choice but to fight. He had to prove his mother was innocent. The lead up to Mariko's trial was a haze. Police insisted they had irrefutable evidence: Mariko's ID card, footprints near the crime scene roughly matching her size, and a neighbor's testimony that placed her in the alleyway that night. None of it made sense to Kenji. Why would she leave her ID behind at a crime scene? She'd been in the kitchen preparing fish cakes only hours before the incident. Was it a setup? While Seiji juggled the heartbreak of his wife's incarceration with the grueling demands of fishing to keep a roof over their heads, Kenji found himself exploring corners of his mother's life he'd never questioned. He rummaged through old notebooks, receipts from her street stall, any record or clue that might suggest who would frame her and why. Late at night he lay sleepless, hugging his stuffed dog, a remnant from childhood, gifted by Mariko in happier times, wondering if he could piece together the puzzle in time. It was less than a week before the trial commenced when Kenji found his first lead, hidden in an old jacket pocket belonging to Mariko. He was searching for anything that might be evidence of innocence, a concept drawn straight from the spy novels he devoured. Inside the pocket was a crumpled slip of paper with a note in hurried handwriting. "Meet me by the old boathouse, 9 p.m., important." The date on the note matched the night Mr. Takahashi was attacked. Kenji's heart pounded. Why would his mother have a meeting at that time and place, especially if she had been home cooking dinner? He had seen her that evening. She went nowhere, as far as he knew. Could the note have come from someone else? It was a clue, though, something tangible. The question was, who wrote it? Armed with this scrap of information, Kenji tried to tell the defense attorney, Ms. Abrams, the only person besides his father who would listen without instantly dismissing him. She studied the note grimly. "This is interesting," she said, "but it's not enough to overturn the evidence they have." Nonetheless, Ms. Abrams promised to keep it in mind. Kenji felt deflated until Ms. Abrams handed him a stack of photographs, pictures from the scene that had been shared with the defense. "These are all we have access to at the moment. The prosecution is withholding some evidence, claiming it could compromise their investigation. See if you notice anything unusual." Dutifully, Kenji spent hours at the small kitchen table, poring over each photograph. The images were blurry, taken under the flickering street lamp near Mr. Takahashi's house. One showed a partial imprint in the muddy ground, presumably left by a shoe. Another depicted the back door where the break-in occurred. He zoomed in on details: footprints, a toppled trash can, shards of glass from a broken lantern. But just as he was about to give up, something made him pause. In one of the pictures, behind the trash can, he spotted what might be a set of faint marks scratched into the wooden fence. They formed a short horizontal line next to a triangular symbol. He couldn't decipher it, but it looked deliberate, like some kind of code or signature. It might have been nothing, yet Kenji's instincts, or perhaps the influence of those spy novels, insisted it was meaningful. He circled it on the photograph, showed it to his father, who merely shrugged helplessly. Ms. Abrams, too preoccupied preparing for trial, glanced at it but couldn't see how it related. She did, however, promise to file a request to examine the site more carefully. Time passed in a blink, and then the trial began. The tension inside the courtroom was almost unbearable. Flashes from cameras outside the courthouse lit up the windows like miniature lightning strikes. Kenji sat in the back, hugging his stuffed dog, trying to steady his breathing. He watched as the prosecutor unleashed a barrage of evidence, painting his mother as a desperate woman, buried in debts, angry at Takahashi over rumored disputes. Each time he hammered home a point, Kenji felt a cold spike of panic. But Ms. Abrams held firm. She questioned the reliability of the so-called witness who saw Mariko running from the scene. She pointed out inconsistencies in police documentation. She challenged the chain of custody for the ID card, implying it could have been planted. It helped that Mariko, trembling yet composed, recounted her alibi. At home, cooking fish cakes for the next day's stall. Still, the lack of a neutral witness, someone who could vouch for her presence from evening till night, left her vulnerable. On the second day, a break occurred that no one anticipated. During a recess, Kenji overheard two of the prosecution's investigators talking near a vending machine. Crouched behind a potted plant, the boy listened. One investigator muttered, "Why didn't we check for other footprints at the boathouse if that note she had was real?" The boss said it wasn't relevant, but something doesn't add up. The other shook his head. "Just follow orders, man. No point stirring the pot. We've got enough to convict her. The idea alone is..." Then they drifted away, sipping coffee, leaving Kenji wide-eyed. So the authorities had been aware of that cryptic note, the one summoning Mariko to the boathouse, and had chosen to dismiss it. Why? It struck Kenji as suspicious, the kind of detail that could open up alternate theories about who truly orchestrated the crime. He rushed to Ms. Abrams, who promised once more to press for more thorough investigation. But official channels moved slowly. Kenji, impatient, decided to take matters into his own hands. That evening, after his father turned in early, exhausted from a day on the fishing boat, Kenji slipped out. The winter air was sharp, stinging his cheeks as he headed down the deserted piers to the old boathouse. He knew it was reckless, but he also knew time was running out. The next day, the court was expecting final arguments, and Ms. Abrams seemed overwhelmed. If there was anything at that boathouse to prove Mariko was being framed, Kenji had to find it now. The boathouse stood at the end of a rotting dock, shutters fallen off, the paint peeled, the tide lapped at the barnacle-encrusted pilings below. He switched on a small flashlight, the beam trembling as he inched through the door. A dank, fishy smell permeated the air. Ropes and broken nets lay strewn about. A leaky rowboat was propped in a corner. But Kenji calmed every inch, checking beams, floorboards. He pictured his mother pacing anxiously, waiting for whoever wrote that note. After a nerve-wracking search, his light caught something glinting behind a stack of old crates. Carefully, he pulled them aside to reveal a tarnished pocket watch. Its face cracked. He picked it up, heart drumming. The back was engraved with stylized initials, T.H. He had no idea whose they might be, but this watch didn't belong to Mariko. He pressed the latch, and inside the case was a small slip of paper folded in half. The paper was damp and nearly disintegrating, but he could just make out writing scrawled in a shaky hand. "Meet me after you get the money from him. I need my share." Then underneath, the same triangular mark from the photograph. Kenji's blood turned cold. Clutching the watch, Kenji realized he might be onto something dangerous. Could TH be the real attacker or a conspirator? He took photos with his phone, intending to show Ms. Abrams the next morning. Only then did he notice how dark it had grown, how alone he was in the boathouse. A sense of being watched prickled at him. Hastily he pocketed the watch and made a dash for home, each step echoing ominously across the deserted pier. Upon returning, he found his father dozing in the armchair, the flicker of the TV playing on his tired features. Kenji quietly crept to his own room. For hours he lay awake, hugging his stuffed dog, replaying what he'd found, forcing himself to be calm. He had to be logical, precise, like the heroes in his spy novels. Morning came, and the trial resumed. But in the corridor outside the courtroom, Kenji tugged Ms. Abrams's sleeve, breathless as he showed her the watch and the note inside. She examined them, eyebrows shooting upward. "Where did you—" "Never mind." Her gaze flickered between worry and resolve. "This might be significant, but let's see how we can use it without implicating you for potential tampering. I'll do my best to introduce it in cross-examination." Kenji nodded, anxiety a tight coil in his stomach. He took his seat behind the defense table, glancing at his mother in her rumpled prison uniform. She offered him a wan smile. He tried to smile back, but fear hollowed his chest. When the judge called the court to session, Ms. Abrams rose, citing newly discovered evidence. The prosecutor, scowling, objected vehemently, claiming the watch's chain of custody was unclear. The judge allowed a short recess to review. Tensions soared. Still, a puzzle piece was missing. TH. The watch hinted at collusion, a share of money. Did it tie to Mr. Takahashi's finances? Ms. Abrams urged the judge for permission to investigate the lead. The judge, though cautious, grudgingly granted a short extension. For a moment, Mariko exhaled, relief and confusion mingling in her posture. It seemed they had a lifeline. But the prosecutor didn't back down. That afternoon, he presented a shocking revelation. A witness had come forward, claiming Mariko was overheard threatening Mr. Takahashi weeks before the assault. Kenji's world flipped once again. The man, someone Kenji had never seen, took the stand, swearing that he'd heard Mariko say, "If you don't pay me, you'll regret it." Confusion swirled inside Kenji's mind. That was entirely out of character for his mother. Yet the jury seemed affected by the dramatic testimony. During cross-examination, Ms. Abrams tried to discredit the witness, pointing out inconsistencies in his timeline. Yet the damage was done. Public perception swayed further, fueling the rumor that Mariko had sought to extort Mr. Takahashi. Meanwhile, Kenji wondered if TH had any connection to Mr. Takahashi or this new witness. Could the witness be lying? Paid off? Or was the watch an unrelated clue? Late that night, in the cramped defense office, Ms. Abrams, Seiji, and Kenji huddled over documents. A single lamp cast wobbly light on their faces. Ms. Abrams muttered, "If only we knew who TH is, or if there's a record of someone with those initials connected to Takahashi. Let's think about the big picture." Kenji's father massaged his temples. "Mariko never said anything about a fight with Takahashi. She mostly kept to herself. We were behind on stall fees, but not enough to do this." "He's being framed," Kenji insisted, voice cracking. "The watch proves there's someone else, maybe more than one person." He recalled that snippet about share of money. Did it refer to blackmail or stolen funds? It was Miss Abrams's idea to ask around the local business registry, searching for a TH connected to Mr. Takahashi. Kenji volunteered, rummaging through old directories at the public library. Hours later, he discovered an entry. Tanabe Haruki, a name linked to an import-equal fund venture, once a partner of Takahashi. He felt his heart leap. Could Haruki be the TH on the watch? The next day, Ms. Abrams requested the court's approval to call a new witness, Mr. Tanabe Haruki. The prosecutor looked livid, claiming irrelevance. But the judge, seemingly intrigued by the watch, allowed it. Tensions soared again as Haruki arrived in the courtroom, a man in his 50s, impeccably dressed, sporting a silver chain around his neck. Kenji's eyes darted to see if there was a matching pocket watch. He spotted an empty chain clip on Haruki's belt. Could that be where the missing watch once was? Under questioning, Haruki admitted to having had a business relationship with Takahashi. They'd parted ways acrimoniously months ago over suspected embezzlement. "But I have no connection to the crime," Haruki insisted. Ms. Abrams produced the tarnished watch. Haruki's face went rigid. He denied it was his, but seemed unnerved by the triangular symbol inside. Then, fumbling his composure, he spat, "This is nonsense. Why drag me into your family's tragedy?" Ms. Abram cornered him. "Sir, you have the remains of a matching chain on your belt. Are we to believe that's a coincidence?" The prosecutor objected repeatedly, but the judge demanded Haruki cooperate. Soon cracks appeared in his story. He admitted to meeting someone that night near the waterfront, though he refused to name them. The more Ms. Abrams pressed, the more Haruki sweated. He claimed ignorance about any plan to attack Takahashi. Yet the ledger of phone calls, subpoenaed by Ms. Abrams, showed repeated contact between Haruki and an unlisted number around the time of the assault. Likely the phone Mr. Takahashi used or had ties to. It began to look suspicious indeed. Still, it was not enough for a smoking gun. Mariko's fate hung in the balance while the jury watched each twist with rapt attention. Kenji could sense a shift. People now doubted whether the case was so straightforward. But the prosecution hammered back. Even if Haruki had a grudge against Takahashi, there's no direct link to Mrs. Okada. No proof she wasn't the one who confronted Mr. Takahashi. They reintroduced the fingerprint evidence on the door handle, the footprints. The court audience murmured, uneasy and divided. Kenji refused to give in. On a hunch, he visited the hospital where Mr. Takahashi was finally awake, though in fragile health. Because Kenji was a child, he managed to slip past the watchful gaze of staff more easily. He found Takahashi's room, tiptoeing inside. The man lay pale against crisp sheets, an ivy in his arm, eyes half-lidded. At first, he seemed disoriented, but when Kenji introduced himself as Mariko's son, Takahashi's expression darkened. "I won't talk to you," he muttered, voice raspy. "Your mother tried to kill me. She came out of nowhere that night. I recognized her face. She said I owed her, threatened me." Kenji's heart skipped. "That's not true," he whispered. "She was at home. I saw her. Why would she confront you?" Takahashi snorted, wincing at the pain. "She said I owed her father money. Some old debt, apparently. Then she demanded more. Next thing I knew, I was on the floor. I blacked out. Her father. My grandfather's been gone for years, and we never had dealings with you," Kenji insisted. "Are you certain it was her?" Takahashi frowned. "It was dark. But I recall the hair, the voice. She looked like your mother." His eyes flitted sideways, uncertain. "I was barely conscious. All I know is I found her ID after I woke up. So who else could it have been?" Kenji's head swirled. So that was how Takahashi was so certain. Was someone impersonating Mariko? But how? Then he thought of the possibility that the ID was planted or stolen. He pressed Takahashi, describing the watch with TH engraved. The mention of Tanabe Haruki made the man's face drain of color. "Haruki, that traitor," he muttered, voice trembling with old bitterness. "We parted ways. He had every reason to ruin me, maybe even set me up. But how does your mother factor into that? Did she owe him something?" "No," Kenji protested. "My mother wouldn't do anything like that. Someone else, someone who looked like her, must have attacked you. Maybe working with Haruki?" Shifting painfully, Takahashi coughed. I can't be sure. At the time I thought it was her. But if Haruki's behind this, he's cunning. He'd do anything to keep me from exposing his misdeeds. I suspected him of laundering money. If he found out I was going to the authorities, maybe he hired someone to come after me. A spark of hope ignited in Kenji's chest. "You have to testify," he pleaded. Tell the court you aren't certain it was my mother." Takahashi glared. "Why should I? She's already half convicted. My memory is shot from the blow to my head. And Haruki? If I accuse him, he might come after me again. I'm not in a position to pick fights." Kenji pressed his lips together, tears burning at the corners of his eyes. "If you truly think Haruki set you up, do you want him to get away with it? Sometimes silence is more dangerous." He recalled a phrase his father once told him. In times of crisis, the only thing worse than risking the truth is living with a lie. The same principle might move Takahashi, but Kenji couldn't be sure. He left the hospital disheartened, uncertain whether Takahashi would cooperate. Regardless, the next court date loomed, with Ms. Abrams needing a final piece of exculpatory evidence. The tension at home was palpable. Father and son tiptoeing around each other as the days turned into nights of anxious insomnia. Seiji grew more silent, his face etched with worry. Kenji tried to stay strong, but the gloom pressed in on him. Mariko's next hearing would be the critical juncture. Either they'd present enough evidence to cast doubt on the prosecution's narrative, or she might very well be found guilty. Then, in a twist Kenji never saw coming, Mr. Takahashi showed up at the courthouse on the very morning Ms. Abrams was scheduled to deliver her closing argument. Leaning on a cane, he spoke privately with Ms. Abrams in a small antechamber, refusing to meet Kenji's eyes. Ms. Abrams emerged later looking stunned. "He's agreed to testify that he's no longer certain it was Mariko who attacked him," she told them in a hushed tone. "He's also willing to admit the possibility Haruki had motive and means." This was a major breakthrough, but Ms. Abrams warned it might not seal the case. "We still need to dismantle the ID card evidence and show how Haruki might have staged it." That day in court felt electric, brimming with tension. The gallery was packed with spectators, many from Kenji's school or the local fish market. Takahashi took the stand, his voice shaky but resolute. He admitted his recollection was partial at best, that he had simply recognized a general likeness to Mariko, but not enough to be certain. He conceded that Haruki had reason to harm him or orchestrate an attack. The prosecutor bombarded Takahashi with blistering questions, suggesting he had been gotten to by the defense. But Takahashi held his ground, repeating that he simply wasn't sure. For the first time, real doubt about Mariko's guilt seeped into the room. Kenji squeezed his stuffed dog so tightly it almost tore at the seams. The turning point arrived when Ms. Abrams unveiled a surprising piece of evidence gleaned from phone records and forensic analysis. Investigators had discovered that calls originating from Haruki's phone pinged off the same cell tower near Takahashi's residence on the night of the assault, at the same approximate time. Coupled with a newly subpoenaed bank statement, it showed a suspicious deposit to an unknown individual shortly before the attack. "It appears Mr. Haruki may have hired someone to impersonate or overshadow Mrs. Okada," Ms. Abrams explained to the court. "That could be how her ID showed up at the scene, stolen and planted." Haruki in attendance bristled with indignation, but his face betrayed mounting panic. The more Ms. Abrams spoke, the clearer it seemed that Haruki had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to ruin Takahashi and deflect blame onto Mariko. If Haruki had once seen Mariko or had access to her personal documents, that would have made it easy to forge a scenario implicating her. Yet the prosecutor refused to yield, demanding Ms. Abrams produce the actual impersonator. The room erupted into loud debate. The judge had to gavel everyone back to silence. Ms. Abrams turned to Kenji, nodding solemnly. It was time for him to speak. That's how Kenji found himself summoned to the witness stand. This time, officially. He'd given a small statement earlier, but now Ms. Abrams intended for him to reveal the watch, the scratched symbol, and everything else he'd discovered. Wearily, Kenji took the oath. He explained how he found the watch in the boathouse, the slip of paper inside referencing share of money, and the triangular mark that mirrored the scratch on Takahashi's fence. He described overhearing the investigators dismissing that lead, how the watch chain matched the clasp on Haruki's belt. The prosecutor tried to paint Kenji as an over-imaginative boy meddling in adult affairs. But Kenji, though frightened, drew on every ounce of courage he had. He recounted each detail with clarity, speaking from the heart. "I know I'm just a kid," he concluded, voice trembling, "but that doesn't mean I can't see what's right in front of me. My mother is innocent. Someone else set her up. All I ask is for everyone to look at the truth." Outside, cameras flashed like furious fireflies. In the back row, Seiji rubbed his eyes, pride and apprehension tangling in his expression. Just then, Miss Abrams dropped a bombshell. New testimony from a local fisherman, Tanaka, the very man who had advised Kenji that the truth often lay hidden like pearls. He had come forward that morning to declare he saw someone rummaging through Mariko's vending cart the night of the assault, wearing a hood, but with a faintly visible scar across the chin. Miss Abrams produced old photos showing Haruki with a distinct scar. That revelation triggered an uproar. The puzzle pieces were aligning, and Haruki's involvement looked undeniable. Sensing the tide turning, the prosecutor demanded a recess, but the judge refused. Under mounting pressure, Haruki cracked. He stood abruptly, shouting about how Takahashi had ruined his life and how everything was supposed to be easy to pin on Mariko, that naive fish cake seller. Gasps erupted around the courtroom. The judge hammered his gavel repeatedly. With horror, Kenji watched Haruki's face twist in fury, as if he realized too late that he'd incriminated himself. Court officers rushed forward to contain him. Moments later, the judge declared order and allowed Ms. Abrams to proceed. The confession, albeit partially blurted in anger, was enough to further support Ms. Abrams' argument that Haruki orchestrated the break-in and assault. The ID card? Stolen from Mariko's cart. The footprints? Fabricated with shoes approximating her size. The battered watch belonged to Haruki, who had apparently dropped it in the boathouse after meeting with the accomplice he hired to pose as Mariko. Kenji felt a surge of relief so intense he had to clutch the stand to keep from buckling over. 12 days of testimonies, cross-examinations, and frayed nerves finally culminated in the judge's announcement. Mariko was cleared of all charges. The real suspect was Haruki and whoever had helped him carry out the attack. Ms. Abrams, turning to Kenji with watery eyes, mouthed, "Well done." The courtroom erupted in a commotion of photographers snapping away as Mariko was freed from her shackles. Kenji dashed over, flinging his arms around her. She clutched him as though he were the only life raft in a raging sea. Outside, Seiji waited, tears glistening, to embrace them both. By the time they stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the midday sun had pushed away the gray clouds, bathing the crowd in bright warmth. A few reporters rushed forward to ask Kenji how he felt, what gave him the courage to speak out. Overwhelmed, he pressed closer to his mother, offering only a simple statement. "I just had to do what was right. My mom is the kindest person I know." Then the three of them, father, mother, and son, slipped away, longing for a moment of quiet. In the days that followed, relief flowed through their tiny apartment like a cleansing breeze. Mariko's name was cleared, although she bore emotional scars. Gossip began to shift, many neighbors expressing remorse for doubting her. Seiji's fishing business was unaffected physically, but spiritually he felt the upheaval deep in his bones. And Kenji found that in the aftermath, people looked at him differently. Sometimes with awe, sometimes with apologies. Classmates who once mocked or avoided him gradually warmed again. He chose to be kind rather than resentful. "We all make mistakes," he told one boy who sidled up shyly to him on the playground. "We just have to learn and move forward." Mariko, free at last, found herself wanting to help others who were wrongfully accused, people lacking the resources to defend themselves. She understood how it felt to be alone in a cell, labeled a criminal. Inspired, she resolved to start a small advocacy group, offering legal aid dinners in partnership with Ms. Abrams. Kenji, meanwhile, discovered new direction. He might have been a child of 12, but after witnessing firsthand how a single voice can reshape an entire case, he realized the power of truth-telling. One evening he turned to his mother, a serious expression on his face, and said, "Maybe I'll become a detective someday, or a journalist who investigates the truth." Mariko smiled, her eyes gleaming with pride. "You'd do a lot of good with that," she replied quietly. Of course, healing was not instant. Mariko had nightmares about the night of her arrest, jolting awake drenched in sweat. Kenji wrestled with guilt over how his mother had suffered, wishing he'd somehow uncovered the conspiracy sooner. Seiji quietly navigated his own regrets, having initially told Mariko not to make waves when the gossip started. But day by day, they mended. Each meal they shared felt like a victory feast. Neighbors who had once glared now bought fish cakes from Mariko's stall with shy, apologetic smiles. Life slowly knit itself back together, albeit with seams that would always remind them of the ordeal. About a month after the trial concluded, Ms. Abrams visited the Okada home. She came bearing good news. Haruki is facing charges for aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit robbery, and perjury. The accomplice he hired was caught trying to flee the city. I suspect Takahashi might file a separate lawsuit. None of this would have come to light if not for your perseverance. Then she set a small, sealed envelope in front of me. Consider it a gesture of thanks from the people who have followed your case. Along with a grant from a local philanthropic group. They're moved by your story. They want to help you recover from the losses you suffered. Mariko's eyes welled with tears as she and Seiji opened the envelope to find a financial compensation offer, substantial enough to repay her legal debts and give the street stall a needed upgrade. Kenji looked on, stunned. Ms. Abrams placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, stooping to meet his gaze. "I hope you never doubt the difference one determined soul can make," she said softly. For Kenji, those words echoed a familiar sentiment. His mind drifted back to old fisherman Tanaka's comment about pearls in deep water and how you have to dive to find them. Was that not exactly what Kenji had done? Dove into hidden truths to rescue his mother? He offered Ms. Abrams a shaky smile. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing me." Later, as the sun dipped behind the silhouette of trawlers out at sea, the family gathered on the small balcony outside their apartment. The harbor glowed with the golden hue of dusk. For the first time in months, there was no tension pressing down on them, only the rustle of a gentle breeze and the comfortable closeness of being together. Seiji laid a hand on Kenji's shoulder. "I never want to go through something like that again," he muttered, voice raw with emotion. "But if we had to, I'm thankful we had you at our side, son. Your courage saved us." Mariko nodded. "And saved me from despair," she added, gently ruffling Kenji's hair. A smile tugged at her lips. "Sometimes I look at you and see the little boy who used to cry when his goldfish died. But now I see someone who stands up to fear." Kenji blushed, hugging the stuffed dog in one arm. He couldn't help feeling as if he had grown older, wiser throughout the ordeal. "It's funny," he said quietly. "I used to read spy stories and dream about being the hero. I never realized being a hero is a lot scarier than in books." His father squeezed his shoulder. "It's the kind of fear that shapes us, Kenji. At some point, every one of us is tested." They fell silent, gazing out at the harbor lights reflecting on the water, the old fishing boats bobbing like weary guardians. A sense of calm enveloped them, reminding Kenji of the value of home, of family, of trust. "Cherish the moments of peace," as an old saying goes, for they are the quiet gifts after the storms have passed. In the following weeks, newspapers reported not just on Haruki's downfall, but on Mariko's new initiative to help others unjustly accused. Kenji found himself approached by local journalists who called him the boy detective. He answered them politely, though he felt shy. Among the local chatter, one phrase blossomed across the community. "Sometimes even the youngest voice can speak the loudest truth." It became the tagline for short editorials, fueling an undercurrent of hope in the city. For Kenji, it was a testament to the power of perseverance. Yet just when the Okada family believed they could finally rest, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, no name. Inside, only a few typewritten words. The story isn't finished." Kenji's hands shook as he showed it to his mother. She exhaled, shoulders tense. Seiji's jaw clenched. Ms. Abrams, upon seeing it, surmised it might be from someone connected to Haruki's network or another scheme that hadn't yet surfaced. Or it might be a simple act of intimidation by a disgruntled individual who resented the exposure of corruption. Once more, the horizon of their life seemed clouded with uncertainty. But if the crisis had taught them anything, it was to stand firm. "We won't be frightened into silence," Mariko declared. And so they turned the letter over to Ms. Abrams and the authorities. While it stirred worry, it couldn't overshadow their newfound confidence. Even Kenji, though alarmed, refused to let fear rule him. Life carried on. Each day at dawn, Seiji left for the harbor, returning late afternoon with crates of fish. Mariko reopened her street stall, lines of customers forming, eager to taste her fish cakes again. Kenji returned to class, forging cautious but genuine friendships with classmates who had once ostracized him. He also found a new passion in assisting with his mother's advocacy efforts, distributing flyers, raising small donations. On quiet evenings, he would accompany her to speak with people who needed legal advice, Miss Abrams often present to guide them. Though Kenji didn't understand all the legal complexities, he recognized the same hunger for justice he'd once felt, and he saw how a listening ear could lift someone's spirit more than any empty reassurance. "Sometimes," Ms. Abrams remarked one night, "people just need to believe that they're not alone. That's the first step toward finding hope." Mariko nodded, recalling her own darkest hours. For Kenji, it resonated deeply. He thought back on how alone he had felt, overshadowed by adult disbelief. Until Ms. Abrams took him seriously. And so the Okadas wrote a new chapter of their life, one marked by solidarity, empathy, and vigilance. In the hush of the harbor at sunset, Mariko often found Kenji perched on a crate, gazing out at the sea, stuffed dog in hand. "What do you see out there?" she asked him once, voice tender. He paused, scanning the horizon. "I see secrets waiting to be discovered," he murmured. "But also possibility. The sea hides pearls and storms, both at once. It's up to us to brave the waters if we want the treasures." Mariko smiled, gently enveloping him in a side hug. "You speak like a wise old poet sometimes." He shrugged, cheeks flushing. "I just want to be ready for whatever comes next." Time drifted into months. Haruki's trial culminated in a guilty verdict, satisfying a community that yearned for closure. His accomplice, the man who physically attacked Takahashi while disguised to look like Mariko, testified to everything: how Haruki planned it, how he used Mariko's stolen ID to frame her. Their confessions laid bare the ugliness of greed and malice. The city, scandalized by the revelations, realized how close an innocent woman had come to destruction. Ironically, the swirling publicity also brought new life to Mariko's street stall, the freed fish shake, as one joking sign labeled it, becoming a modest local attraction. Tourists who had heard of the case on social media came to sample her cooking and congratulate her on clearing her name. She accepted their kindness with gentle grace, though Kenji sensed her sorrow for the ordeal that had first thrust them into the spotlight. Meanwhile, Ms. Abrams nominated Mariko for a small civic award that recognized ordinary citizens who have overcome injustice to champion a cause. The speech ceremony took place one breezy Saturday morning in a quaint park near the courthouse. Kenji sat in the front row, watching with watery pride as his mother accepted the award. She delivered a heartfelt speech about how fear and distrust had nearly broken her spirit, how the unwavering faith of her family, and especially her son, kept her afloat. She ended with a reflection that silenced the audience. In a raging sea of accusations and rumors, a small voice stood out, refusing to be drowned. Kenji taught me that sometimes the loudest truth comes from the quietest heart. And justice isn't a single act. It's the path we walk every day, hand in hand. The applause that followed was thunderous. Kenji's face flushed, tears slipping unbidden down his cheeks. He thought about the letter they'd received, the dark suggestion that the story isn't finished. But as he listened to applause ring out under the morning sun, he also realized, no matter what new storms brewed, they'd face them together. Like clockwork, life resumed its gentle flow. Kenji studied diligently, balancing homework with volunteer tasks for his mother's advocacy group. Seiji's fishing business stabilized, allowing him to hire a helper so he could spend more evenings with his family. Mariko poured her heart into cooking and into local activism. Their small apartment remained humble, but it was now a place of solidarity rather than despair. One cool autumn afternoon, Ms. Abrams dropped by with a sealed envelope. "This arrived at my office," she explained. "It looks similar to the previous threatening letter, except it wasn't typed. Someone had handwritten a brief message. Even if the courts have decided, some truths remain hidden. Be careful." It wasn't explicitly threatening, but a chill spread through the room as they read it. "Maybe it's from someone connected to Haruki's scheme," Ms. Abrams suggested, "or from somebody who thinks there's another layer of corruption unaddressed." Mariko glanced at Kenji, exchanging a determined nod. They reported the letter to the police, but did not let it derail their progress. The possibility of further conspiracies weighed on them, but Kenji found himself distinctly less afraid than he would have been months before. He'd faced enough shadows to know you can't hide from them forever. The best you can do is shine your light. Days slid into weeks, and the letters continued. Rare, cryptic, always hinting at unseen conspirators or deeper secrets. Some suggested Takahashi had been involved in more wrongdoing than was revealed in court. Others insinuated Haruki wasn't the true mastermind, that a larger criminal ring might still be out there. Ms. Abrams reminded them that rumors often spring up in the wake of high-profile trials. "It might just be people stirring the pot," she insisted. "Or it could be legit. We can't be sure." But each letter included an odd watermark shaped like a stylized fish, along with a signature reading simply, "A concerned citizen." The repetition of the fish symbol struck Kenji's curiosity, like an echo of the triangular scratch he'd once seen. He burned to investigate, but promised Ms. Abrams and his mother he wouldn't do anything rash. Even so, at school he found himself leafing through local news archives, searching for any mention of a ring that might adopt a fish symbol. Every time he discovered a snippet about small-time smuggling or shady maritime deals, his pulse quickened, imagining some elaborate network. Yet nothing concrete emerged. The tension eased somewhat as time wore on without any more direct aggression. Kenji turned 13 in a modest celebration at home. His mother baked him a special fish cake shaped like a detective's magnifying glass, a playful nod to his sleuthing. Everyone laughed, the lingering pain overshadowed by gratitude. "We've come so far," Mariko said tearfully, raising a glass of juice and a toast. "I can't believe how close we were to losing everything." Kenji caught his father's gaze. They exchanged a smile. The threat implied by the cryptic letters remained, but for now, they had each other and they had peace. As the lights in their tiny dining area cast warm glows on their faces, Kenji thought, "This is what victory feels like." Not the cheer of the crowd outside a courtroom, but the quiet contentment of a family freed from injustice. Yet fate had one more surprise in store. On an ordinary Wednesday, Ms. Abrams phoned Mariko in a flurry of excitement. "You'll want to see this," she said. "Come down to the courthouse." Kenji, brimming with curiosity, persuaded his mother to let him tag along. They arrived in a small side office in the courthouse, where Ms. Abrams was seated with a police detective. She held a folder thick with documents. "We've uncovered a series of bank transfers," she explained, adrenaline shining in her eyes. "They trace from Haruki's offshore account to 3 or 4 local businesses under shell corporations. One of them belongs to a man known for forging IDs. Another was rumored to run a ring that impersonates others for staged crimes. It appears Haruki's scheme was part of a bigger criminal network. Her voice dropped. The fish symbol on your letters? That's apparently the group's calling card. The letters might be from someone inside who wants to blow the whistle but is scared. Mariko's hand shot to her mouth. Kenji felt as though the floor had tilted beneath him. It wasn't just a random lunatic sending cryptic notes. A real conspiracy existed, something that might have ruined many others like it nearly ruined Mariko. Ms. Abrams wore a grave expression. It's bigger than us now. The detective here confirms the investigation is widening. They suspect your case was a single thread, an attempt to tie up a loose end or distract from a grander plot. The detective, a tall woman with a stern demeanor, nodded. We will need your cooperation, Ms. Okada, should we proceed with a formal inquiry. You and your son might have to testify about anything linking Haruki's group to the attempt to frame you. Fear flickered in Mariko's eyes. Kenji swallowed hard, recalling the menacing letters. Even if the courts have decided, some truths remain hidden. If they're so dangerous, will we be safe? He asked softly. The detective gave him a faint, reassuring smile. We'll do our best to protect you. People out there admire your courage, and now that the ring is under scrutiny, they might be more concerned with covering their tracks than hurting you. Still, be cautious. Outside the courthouse, the crisp midday air felt charged with possibility and dread. Mariko stood with Kenji under the old oak tree near the steps. What do you think, my little detective? She asked, half laughing despite the knot of anxiety in her tone. He gazed up at her, stuffed dog dangling from his arms. I think we have to see it through, he whispered. If there are others like you, like us, caught in their web, we can't just turn away. Mariko nodded, tears pricking her eyes. She touched Kenji's cheek. You've grown so much. Sometimes I forget how young you still are. Kenji shrugged, glancing at the swirl of lawyers and clients heading in and out of the courthouse. Growing up is not just about age, is it? It's about the truths we face. In that moment, the sun broke through the overcast sky, illuminating mother and son. For a heartbeat, everything seemed bright and hopeful. They had already conquered one battle. If another loomed, they would rally again. This was the new reality for the Okadas, forging ahead in the name of justice, unafraid to stand for what was right. In the weeks that followed, the police detective worked closely with Ms. Abrams and Mariko to gather testimony on how Haruki manipulated evidence. More hidden records surfaced, implicating individuals in forgery and extortion. Kenji quietly returned to his daily routine of school, chores, and helping with his mother's advocacy. But he also listened in on the new developments, determined not to be left out. Sure enough, the threatening letters stopped. In their place, a final message arrived at Ms. Abrams' office from the so-called concerned citizen. This note was different in tone, almost apologetic. I see you found them. I hope you continue to reveal the truth. I cannot step forward, but I wish you luck. Like the others, it bore the fish watermark, but no menacing warning. Kenji stared at the paper in Ms. Abrams' hand, an odd sense of closure warm. Someone on the inside wanted the conspiracy exposed and had guided them with cryptic hints. Perhaps that person had done all they could. Now it was up to the authorities. In the end, the ring was dismantled by law enforcement efforts over many months. More arrests followed, new trials were convened. Through every hearing, Ms. Abrams and Mariko were there, lending emotional support to unsuspecting circums who had nearly been ensnared by false charges or extortion. Kenji sat in the gallery whenever he could, absorbing everything. Each success made him feel a rush of pride and a humble acceptance that justice was an ongoing process, never fully complete. One chilly evening, well after the conspirators' final convictions, the Okadas gathered outside the boathouse where Kenji had once discovered Haruki's watch. The rotting structure was slated for demolition. Father, mother, and son stood on the dock as the sun dipped below the horizon, the water reflecting a mosaic of oranges and purples. "This place started it all," Kenji remarked, hugging his stuffed dog. Though taller and older now, he still kept the tattered companion near, a symbol of all they had endured. "It's like the memory of a nightmare that turned into something bigger." Seiji ruffled Kenji's hair, expression tender. "Yet from that nightmare we found truth. Hard truth, but it gave us a purpose." Mariko exhaled, lips curving into a small, reminiscent smile. "Life often throws storms at us. Remember how terrified we were? And here we stand, stronger than before." She reached out, hooking her arms around her husband and child. The boathouse groaned as the wind picked up, as if the old timbers were sighing a final farewell. Kenji looked at the weathered boards, recalling the moment he uncovered that watch, heart pounding as he realized the evidence might save his mother. "I used to think heroes wore capes and solved everything in an instant," he said. "Now I know it's never that simple. Real heroism is about refusing to give in day after day." Mariko kissed the top of his head. "You, my dear son, taught me that lesson." And so they lingered until the last trace of sunlight vanished behind the horizon. The gulls cried overhead, waves lapping gently below the dock. In that hush, the Okadas shared a rare peace, an unspoken unity that transcended words. In the months to come, Kenji's story of how he stood up for his mother in court, how he uncovered the scandal, spread beyond their region. Occasional reporters or curious bloggers visited, wanting a quote or an update on the courageous boy. Kenji found the attention daunting, but he humbly answered, always returning to the same message: "I did what needed to be done." Anyone would do the same for the people they love. Mariko, too, saw her small advocacy group flourish. Partnering with Ms. Abrams' legal connections, they helped other families navigate false accusations, ensuring no one else endured the torment they had faced. Bit by bit, the city's atmosphere shifted from suspicion to compassion, as more residents realized injustice could befall anyone. Now and then, Kenji would be reminded of the conspirators or the frightened nights waiting to see if his mother would come home. Memories like ghosts, drifting in the back of his mind. But each time, he overcame the wave of dread by remembering how it felt to stand in that courtroom, to speak the words that shattered the lie. Some moments shaped a person's soul, leaving them forever changed. This was his. On Kenji's 14th birthday, they threw a modest party at their apartment, the same living room where police had once dragged Mariko away in handcuffs. Laughing relatives and a few close friends packed into the small space. Miss Abrams showed up with a new book for Kenji about investigative journalism. The inscription read, "To Kenji, may the truth always guide you and may your heart remain brave." As he flipped through the pages, Kenji felt a surge of gratitude that nearly made him tear up. He found a quiet corner to compose himself, gazing at the swirling festivities. His father and mother exchanging kind words with guests, the clink of cups, the rustle of wrapping paper. None of it would be happening if they hadn't fought for justice. If Kenji had remained silent, who knew what tragedy might have destroyed them? Late that night, when the guests departed, Seiji watched Kenji reading the new book. "You've grown so mature," he noted softly. Kenji set the book aside and laid his stuffed dog in his lap. "Sometimes I miss how things were before, but then I remember, we're stronger now." Seiji nodded. "Strength tempered by trials, but remember to enjoy life too, not just the battles." Kenji smiled. "That's what Mom tells me." They embraced, father and son, forging a new future one day at a time. By the end of that year, the Okada's world felt wholly renewed. Mariko's fish stall thrived. Kenji excelled at school while dabbling in writing short articles for the local youth bulletin. And Seiji's fishing business was robust enough to hire 2 assistants. On a personal level, the ordeal drew them closer than ever, forging bonds that heartbreak and public scrutiny could not sever. Indeed, The city recognized them as symbols of resilience and unity. Every so often, Kenji remembered the letter that read, "The story isn't finished." And he agreed in his heart that stories don't truly end. Life is a continuum of chapters, each challenge leading to another, each victory sowing seeds for the next quest. What mattered was that they had the courage to keep reading, keep writing, keep living. Looking back on everything, Kenji saw that truth is both fragile and unbreakable. It can be hidden, twisted, but once brought to light, it holds unstoppable power. On the anniversary of Mariko's exoneration, a local civic group invited the family to speak at a community forum about justice and family resilience. Standing at a small podium, Kenji gulped, scanning the modest crowd. Middle-aged neighbors who once shunned him now offered encouraging smiles. Journalists scribbled notes. In the front row, Ms. Abrams waved, and Tanaka the fisherman gave a thumbs up. Kenji's mother stood behind him, hand on his shoulder, letting him lead. He spoke from the heart, voice cracking at times, but clear. "There was a moment," he said, "when I could have stayed silent. I was so scared. Scared no one would believe me, scared I would make things worse. But then I realized staying silent would definitely make things worse. We can't let fear decide what's right." His eyes flicked to Mariko, who nodded, tears glistening. He continued, "Sometimes we think children can't do much, but I learned that the truth doesn't care about your age or your status. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. Once you do, it's like a seed that grows, shining light on lies and illusions." A hush fell, so silent that Kenji heard the whir of an overhead fan. "When my mother was freed," he went on, voice trembling, "I realized justice isn't a single battle. It's a journey, and each of us can walk that path. If you or someone you know is wrongly accused, don't give up. Reach out for help, because every voice matters." Polite applause grew into a standing ovation. Mariko embraced her son, burying her face in his hair. "You did so well, Kenji," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you, always." Seiji joined, forming a family hug, tears in his eyes. Cameras clicked, capturing the moment, freezing it into an image of hope, a testament that a broken system could be challenged by a determined child's voice. Much later that night, Kenji sat on the balcony of their apartment, cuddling the stuffed dog in his lap, gazing at the moonlit harbor. The gentle hush of waves soothed him, a lullaby that reminded him of his father's early mornings out at sea and his mother's fish stall set up each afternoon. A mild breeze ruffled his hair, carrying the scent of brine and faint cooking smells from the street below. He thought about everything that had transpired since that stormy night so many months ago, how he had battled fear, disbelief, and sorrow to stand up for his mother, how their family overcame betrayal and conspiracy, how a single piece of evidence, a watch, had sparked the unraveling of a grand scheme. It almost felt like he had lived 2 lifetimes in the span of a year. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. With the clarity of hindsight, Kenji understood how crises reveal who we are at our core. He had discovered wells of courage he never knew he possessed. He'd also learned that compassion can spring from the unlikeliest places, from a tired defense attorney who believed in him, from a suspicious victim who found it in his heart to reconsider, from an old fisherman who offered cryptic wisdom, and even from an anonymous insider who risked sending messages about a criminal ring. Each of those threads formed a tapestry of hope. He recalled an older neighbor's quote, something about middle age being the time people cling to routine, but that crisis can remind them how precious life is. Kenji guessed that the same might apply across all ages. Whether you're 13 or 50, adversity can shock you awake, forcing you to decide what values truly matter. For Kenji, the value was simple, truth, tempered by love. Sometimes, Ms. Abrams had once said, the simplest moral is the most profound. We must see each other's humanity before rushing to judgment. Once we do that, the urge to condemn blindly fades. We start to ask real questions. Kenji sighed, hugging the stuffed dog, Then he whispered to the silent night sky, "Thank you for letting us see a better tomorrow." In his mind, he offered gratitude not just to any deity or cosmic force, but to the patchwork of people who'd helped them along the way, people who stepped up, refused to let injustice stand unchallenged. He thought, too, of those still out there, wrongfully accused or marginalized, needing a chance to prove their innocence. If he could, he'd lend them his voice as well. But for now, he simply prayed they found their own path to redemption, as the Okadas had. At last, Kenji rose, stretching his stiff legs. The hush of the harbor invited him to rest. Tomorrow he'd wake early to accompany his father to the docks, hoping to photograph the sunrise for an article he planned to write for the Youth Bulletin. An article about the fishermen who greet each dawn with unwavering faith in the day's catch. Then he'd help Mariko set up her stall, welcoming customers with the aroma of freshly grilled fish cakes, a normal life yet touched by extraordinary meaning. Before heading to bed, he paused by the doorway, glancing over his shoulder at the city lights shimmering on the black water. The truth isn't always what it seems, he mused aloud, remembering the cryptic letter they once received. But when you find it, it can set everything right. Then he stepped inside, a gentle smile curving his lips. Epilogue: Philosophical Lessons for the Reader. Long after the courtroom drama, the dismantling of the conspiracy, and the public recognition, the Okadas still lived in their humble seaside home. They were not wealthy by any stretch, nor free from the everyday struggles of earning a livelihood. Yet they possessed something priceless, a renewed faith in the power of love, integrity, and persistence. From this story, several deep lessons emerge. First, that family bonds can be a fortress against injustice. When Mariko was accused, Kenji and Seiji never stopped believing in her innocence. Their unity formed the bedrock on which the truth could stand. In many ways, crises either fracture families or cement them in unbreakable solidarity. Here it was the latter. As one middle-aged saying goes, "A house built on trust stands even in a hurricane." Second, that no person is too young or too old to seek truth. Kenji's determination, despite his age, shook the foundations of the case. Often, society dismisses children's voices, but the sincerity and clarity of youth can penetrate illusions that trap adults. Conversely, older individuals, through life experience, can also see patterns that younger eyes miss. Collaboration across ages amplifies justice. Third, that courage is often quieter than we imagine. It's not always a grand gesture with trumpets blaring. Sometimes it's a trembling boy stepping onto a witness stand, or a mother returning to her humble street stall with her head held high. Courage can be the choice to speak up when falsehoods dominate, even though your knees knock and your heart pounds. Fourth, mistakes and misunderstandings abound in communities. Neighbors, classmates, coworkers can rush to judge, propelled by rumors or fear, but no one is infallible. The Okadas encountered hostility and gossip, yet they also found that minds can change if given new evidence, empathy, and time. As a beloved middle-aged quote reminds us, "To err is human, to learn divine." Fifth, that resilience springs from adversity. Painful though it was, the ordeal transformed the Okada family, unveiling strengths they never imagined. In times of crisis, one can become bitter or better. They chose the latter. Their ordeal galvanized them to help others. They learned that genuine meaning arises from turning personal suffering into collective support. Finally, that the pursuit of justice is ongoing. Even after the verdict, letters hinted at deeper conspiracies. While the ringleaders were caught, the possibility of hidden threats remained. Reality is seldom wrapped up in neat endings. But the family stand demonstrated that shining a light in one dark corner can illuminate a larger darkness, step by step. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing, goes a timeless adage. The Okadas resolved never to do nothing again. Each of these lessons resonates with a middle-aged audience especially. who often balance the weariness of life's demands with the wisdom gleaned from experiences. Reflecting on this story, one might recall an old fisherman saying, "A net mended in time can save the day's catch." Translated to real life, timely action fueled by love and a thirst for truth can save not just a family, but potentially an entire community from the snares of deception. In the end, Kenji's journey reminds us that no matter our age, station, or fears, we can choose to act. We can speak up when injustice threatens to drown out an innocent voice. We can offer a hand to someone who's fallen under suspicion. We can believe in each other's humanity enough to ask questions instead of hurling accusations. And we can continue onward, even when the letters of doubt arrive, upholding a simple but mighty conviction. Truth matters, love endures, and together we are stronger than any storm. So let the sea be your witness, the tide that ebbs and flows. Let the flickering lampposts in a nighttime alley remind you of how easy it is to mistake shadows for reality. Let the battered stuffed toy, cradled by a trembling child in court, stand as the emblem of fragile hope. When all is said and done, these images call us back to one shining certainty. With courage and unity, even the weakest among us can transform into guardians of justice. And that, dear reader, is a story that never truly ends, but blossoms, chapter by chapter, into the brighter, braver world we dare to create.